Up until this point, we've really focused on what I would consider the basic fundamental foundational components of a USD implementation. You know, understanding how the basic configuration works inside the application and understanding what specific components you're going to use to facilitate that configuration. But to be very honest with you, from a practicality and a deployment perspective, it's really the tip of the iceberg. Using those key critical components can really help you build a nice solid foundation for a USD deployment, but there's going to be a lot more of that that's going to need to come in depending upon what it is that you want to try to accomplish. It could be phone integration with a phone system. It could be custom interaction with custom third-party applications that you've created. It could be any number of different situations. And so what I want to do in this module is really bring it all home. Talk a little bit about, what have we talked about to this point and where does that fit in the grand scheme of things? But what are your next steps? I mean, ultimately, if you're a consultant or you're a developer and you're going to be moving forward, where do you go from here? What are some other things that are going to come into that particular scenario that you want to work through? How do configurations work? How do agent scripts work? How do session lines work? These are all, I don't want to say advanced topics, but these are all next step type situations. And so from there, we're going to get into and just talk at a high level some of the more advanced configuration topics, and also talk a little bit about, from a developer perspective, where you might be looking at to go from a developer standpoint, whether that's creating your own kind of custom CTI adapters to interface with a phone system, creating your own custom hosted controls that have different events and items kind of coded into the back end, or maybe even starting to tailor the way the information is presented through the USD interface by creating custom panel layouts and different items. These are kind of your next areas that you can look at, and that's really what I want to talk about, is where to go from here. So first and foremost, what are the key elements that we've talked about to this point? First and foremost, we talked about hosted controls, and remember, those hosted controls are the central concept in Unified Service Desk. And these are the primary building blocks for what it is that you want to build. These are how you're going to populate in Dynamics 365 applications. This is where you're going to host the individual information that's going to be displayed as part of the Unified Service Desk. Now remember that events, those were more of the notification type situations. So those are, once something happens in a USD component, this is going to notify the system about that information. So this page is finished loading. It's going to broadcast that it's been completed. From there, what are we going to do with it? So your hosted controls are the building blocks. Your events are the items that take place that notify the application about something important that's happened. Your UII actions, those are the actions or the specific declarations that can take place within the context of a hosted control. Now remember, the hosted control types that already exist inside Dynamics 365 Unified Service Desk already have the UII actions coded in there for them. So all you have to do when you are going to try to reference and execute against those actions is create an action call. And within that action call, you define the specific hosted control that you want to work with, and you define the specific UII action for that hosted control that you want to call. And then depending upon what that action is that you've called, there might be different parameters that you need to associate with how it's going to load, where it's going to load those items. A lot of times the specific elements that you're going to bring into the application are going to come from replacement parameters. Replacement parameters are specific things that you want to replace with actual data running within the context of the application from inside USD. It might be the name of a person, it might be the name of an account, it might be a name of a user, it could be a status of a session, it could be any number of different situations. But those replacement parameters are evaluated at runtime, and then they are replaced by the specific data that is in the application. We also talked a little bit about navigation rules and using navigation rules to control how elements are displayed inside the application, and using toolbars to be able to go out and execute specific action calls and associate those toolbars with different elements of the application, whether it's the actual application itself or whether it's a toolbar that is specific to a fundamental hosted control. Those are the foundation. Those skills, using those items, can help you start building solid foundation for Unified Service Desk moving forward. So where do you go from here? Well, there's a lot of different options. First one might be looking at sessions and session management. Now, we've talked about the concept of using a navigation rule to open up and generate a new session. What we haven't talked a lot about is what can we do with those sessions? You know, a lot of the times what you've seen inside the application is those sessions have names. We could go in and we can control how those names are populated. We can control what information is corresponded and displayed inside the application in regards to that session. And we'll talk more about that here in a few minutes as well. Controlling access to the different USD objects. You know, it's much like CRM. CRM has security rules that dictate who has access to, you know, what areas of the application. You have that same item or that same kind of baseline ability when you start talking about Unified Service Desk. You can do different things to control who can see and execute specific hosted controls inside the application. Agent scripting, allowing yourself to build kind of that path that you want agents to be able to guide down through in different situations, whether it's resolving a case or upselling an opportunity based upon products and services that are associated with that. Customizing and tailoring the look. Maybe you don't want your panels or the things that you're seeing inside the application laid out the way that they are. USD's interface is very customizable. Now we're getting into a little bit around some of the coding type situations. So when we start, you know, talking about session management and controlling access and agent scripting, a lot of that can be done through kind of a consultant type scenario with maybe just a little bit of scripting insight. But when we start talking about customizing USD's look and feel and integrating with phone systems and developing hosted controls for line of business applications, that's really where we start bringing in and talking about, you know, a developer building this functionality so you can move forward with that information. Typically speaking, when we talk about sessions and session management, you know, think of one session as one customer interaction. But within the context of that customer interaction, I might do a lot of different situations. I might have the case open. I might be going over and searching a knowledge base to see if there's any cases or any knowledge articles that are associated or would be beneficial to resolving this case. I might be looking at and opening up their account record so I can work through specific situations. I might go into our ERP system and open up our ERP system to get latest invoices and statuses of those invoices inside the application. I'm still doing all of that within the context of the same customer. And so what's nice about that is, from a USD perspective, the session management capabilities give you that mechanism for being able to keep all those screens together. And when you minimize a session or you switch from one session to another, really hiding any of those sessions when you don't actively need to have that information in there and switching that information as needed. So the session management capabilities that USD provides are outstanding. Now, there's a couple of key elements that make those up. The first one is the session tab. So one of the things that, you know, we've talked about within those session tabs is being able to select the specific session that you want, and then understand that when you select that session, these individual tabs and these individual toolbars need to display that's associated with that session. And as soon as I switch to a different session, I want to be able to go ahead and have only the information related to that session. Now, in addition to that, I can also control how these items are named. So I can use what are called session lines to actually control what information is displayed on each one of these tabs when somebody opens up a session. So I can create what are called session line rules that determine how those particular session tabs are named. At the same point, when I open up a specific record or I open up a specific item, a lot of times I want to be able to see additional information. So I'm opening up the account City Power and Light, but now I'm going to switch over to their case when I'm working through it. When I switch over to their case, I might not have an email address or a primary contact or a phone number or their Facebook information or any of that information on the contact record. So what a session overview line allows me to do is to get that true 360-degree view of the customer itself. And so this is what typically displays over on the left-hand side. And it's really just XAML snippets that are evaluated in a specific order, and then based upon that order, it determines what to display. So if you think about how we did navigation rules, session lines are kind of the same type of situation. It goes through and each session line has a number associated with it and an entity associated with it. It evaluates the properties to determine whether or not it should be displayed in the application, and if so, it just pops up and displays it inside that session overview line. What's nice about that is this always adjusts itself based upon what you're doing. And so as people are looking up information or they're going into different scenarios, you can actually have it populate information and populate alerts and different situations. It's always visible at any given time. And so that would be another area that you could go in and start playing with how you want this session information to be displayed, and using things like XAML and XML to really customize how these session overview lines are presented to your users inside the context of the application. Another concept that you might want to consider from kind of an advanced implementation scenario is what are called configurations. So, we've talked about these different hosted controls, and we've talked about these action calls and these events and these navigation rules and all these different elements that really make up how people interact with the application. Well, all of these items are considered USD entries. Now, just because a hosted control exists inside Unified Service Desk doesn't necessarily mean that I have every single user in my organization that I want them to be able to kind of go ahead and work with. So one of the things that you can do with configuration is you can now start to limit who has access to what specific components. So if I have a custom control or a hosted control that displays, or that's typically being used to interface with a line of business application, and I have users who shouldn't have access to that line of business application, I can create configurations. And what it allows you to do is to take a lot of these different elements from your USD implementation and add them to different configurations. And so I might have, the account hosted control. The account hosted control I could make available in every single configuration, configuration 1, 2, and 3. But maybe the contact hosted control I'm only going to make available in configuration 2 and 3. So now only the users that have access to those configurations can work with that information. So it allows you to basically take these common elements and organize them in a way that each individual user that's associated with a configuration only has access to a subset of the information. In essence, gives you one additional layer to be able to lock that information down. Now, there's other information that you can do with configurations around auditing and those types of things, but this is when you want to start kind of applying some different security mechanisms within the context of Unified Service Desk. This is one area or element that would allow you that capabilities. Another area would be agent scripting. And we talked a little bit about agent scripting through different areas, but agent scripting is really your guidance. And there's a lot of different areas that can make up agent scripting. There's the script, there's the actual call script that's going to define what it is that they're doing. And then what happens is you can actually have a drop-down list that populates different types of scripts based upon what questions people have asked. So it gives instructions to the agent in regards to what they should do in certain scenarios. So if you're trying to troubleshoot something and there's a switch that has something on the side, and most agents wouldn't necessarily know that, you could provide some individual instructions to the agent on what should happen within those scenarios. The nice thing about that is as these agents are working through these situations, and as they click on, for example, new service request, there might be 5 or 6 different tasks that accommodate or come up because it is a new service request. So now with agent scripting, I can use those items almost as checklists to say, okay, we're doing a new service request. You need to do these 5 or 6 different tasks in order to accomplish that situation. As people select or do these tasks, now I can have action calls that populate into the application that will do things based upon those scenarios. I need to create a new service request. Maybe that means that we need to create a new case within the application. I can have action calls that will execute some type of functionality to perform some of those different elements, like creating cases and interacting with different situations. And the other thing that's nice is as you work through these scripts and you click on different elements, it'll maintain kind of a history as far as what you've done. So I can see as I create a new service request that gets checked off the list. And so these agent scriptings are a real powerful mechanism that you can use also as a training tool. So you don't necessarily have to, teach all your agents on every single scenario. By using the scripts to provide guidance and instruction to your agents on what they should be accomplishing, you can use these not only to help resolve things in a timely manner, but also as an individual training tool that you can use moving forward. Another way that you can move forward with this is you can now start to get into things like customizing the actual application, customizing the theme. Up until now, we've seen it come in with kind of a very standard, white background. Maybe you want to have a blue background. Maybe you want to have a black background. Maybe you want certain components when people go into the application. Maybe you want, items that are more associated with, cases and things to have maybe a different background associated with the application itself. What's nice about the application is you can create your own themes and styles, and these themes and styles can be applied to different elements of the application. Now, typically, when you load the application, you typically would add a theme or a style right at that particular scenario, but you have the ability to design from scratch these individualized themes and then apply these themes in different areas. The other thing that you can do from a kind of customizing the style and the look is the layouts themselves. We've talked about all these different panels, like your toolbars and your call scripting and your associated records and your items like your main panel. You have the ability to completely configure all of this. Now, this is where developmental stuff comes into play a little bit, but if I wanted to split this into 2 sections, I could do that. If I wanted to create my own kind of panels to control where these different hosted controls were laid out within the context of the application, I can. If I want these toolbars in different spots, I can do all of that. This is where I can go in and I can actually start modifying the XAML and the information around the hosted controls themselves and what are called the panel layout hosted controls to now start controlling and configuring exactly how the application is laid out. Now, there's some additional kind of level 300 courses that discuss that information, but that's the next kind of step that from a developer perspective you could be looking at, is customizing the look, the feel, the interface, and how things are presented. And then finally, the other option would be to start custom developing your solutions. We've talked about all through the course of this particular course how hosted controls are the building blocks for what you're going to do inside Unified Service Desk. Well, when we want to start getting into, panels and customizing visual elements, we are basically going to create hosted controls to facilitate that. If I have a third-party application that I want to, interface with from that standpoint, I can create my own hosted control. I can create what are called CCA hosted controls. I can start custom developing my own hosted controls that I've programmed in specific events, and I've programmed in my specific UII actions, and building this application functionality might be an internal application that I want to interface with, might be an external web service that I want to interface with. But if I want to bring that into the context of USD, I can custom develop and create my own hosted controls. And then I can build them in Visual Studio and then upload them into into Dynamics 365 as a hosted control, define how they need to be interacted with from the application, and now just like any other hosted control, I can start interfacing with that. I can now reference when I want to pull that up, I can create action calls to start working with that particular item, and I can really custom develop my own solutions. Not only from an internal application standpoint, but even think about it from like a phone system standpoint. A lot of, if you're working with this from a call center standpoint, one of the major questions we always get is, okay, well, how do I interface with my phone system? Well, the nice thing is you have the ability to create what are called CTI custom adapters. And these custom adapters can be developed that will allow you to control how agents and how the system will interface with an external phone system. So you take these phone system capabilities, like the ability to transfer a phone call or the ability to, initiate a phone call with somebody and basically build almost like a soft phone hosted control inside the application where people can click a button that transfers a call, or when a call is available, a call gets transferred to an agent. Now you get a screen pop that populates up inside the unified service desk that allows you to see everything that's coming in about that phone call, who it's coming with, and working with items from there. And there's even there's even elements like, chat windows, where if you want to use things like CafeX to actually go in and interface a chat window inside unified service desk. These are all elements that you would be able to custom develop to integrate with your phone system and kind of build forward. And so this is the next step, so to speak, in regards to where you might want to look at going from a development standpoint within the context of USD. So as you can see, there's a lot of where you can go from here. And it's understanding, what those baseline fundamental foundational pieces are that can help you build your starting solutions and your starting unified service desk implementations. And then understanding what the needs of you and your organization are from this point forward, and now building those mechanisms to help you achieve that kind of standardness as you're moving forward. And that's where things like agent scripts come into play. You can use those to create kind of that guided agent experience to help them walk through their phone calls from start to finish and help provide them a list of checklists that they need to accomplish as they're working through individual situations. If you're looking to control access, that's where you can use configurations to go in and only limit people to specific elements inside the Unified Service Desk interface and assign those to specific users based upon what you want them to do. Or you can now get into, from a developer perspective, if you really want to start interfacing with external line of business applications, custom developing your own line of business applications and using them is in the context of hosted controls, so you can interface with those items. It could even be a phone system by creating kind of a custom CTI adapter to interface with a phone system and then use that as a soft phone mechanism or to be able to facilitate screen pops. But you have the fundamentals, and now it's really just a matter of what you want to do moving forward to be able to kind of keep building on that functionality and really provide a customized subsystem for your customers moving forward, or your organization, depending upon what the situation is. So I think, as you can see as we've gone through this, the Unified Service Desk solution is a wonderful solution for contact centers. Understanding that anytime, and not even just contact centers, really any situation where you have representatives or agents who are going to need to interface with multiple applications within the context of a Dynamics 365 record. And over the course of this course, we've looked at all the different scenarios that kind of make up those individual situations. We went through and we first and foremost provided you just kind of an overview of contact centers. What are their needs? What are their traditional pain points that they've run into? And how does Unified Service Desk as a whole fit into that situation? How does it handle things like, or help you handle things like training and facilitation of entering data across different applications? We looked at the setup and the installation. We showed you not only how to set up the information inside and set up the actual desktop application, but we also looked at the installation of the solution inside your Dynamics 365 organization. We talked about the differences of setting up kind of a new environment that you would be used to build a unified service desk solution from the ground up versus demo data, and looking at how you can install very simplistic demo data to just kind of do demonstrations for customers in baseline customization capabilities. But again, remember that if you are going to build a new implementation moving forward, you definitely want to choose the new installation. That'll give you the core functionality, and then you can kind of start building on it from there, or you can just really just kind of build it from the ground up. We looked at hosted controls and talked about how hosted controls are really the foundational building blocks for what you're going to use inside a unified service desk deployment. And we talked about some of the critical hosted control types like your connection manager and your global manager that really need to exist in every single USD deployment that you're working with, and then how some of the other elements like your CRM pages and your interactive service hub hosted controls can help better streamline the process, whether it's using session management or individual items from that standpoint. We talked about if hosted controls are the building blocks, we talked about using actions and action calls and toolbars and events as the mechanisms to be able to really facilitate how that information is going to be displayed inside those hosted controls. We talked about action calls using parameters to initiate specific actions against those hosted controls when events or items occur inside the application. We talked about using toolbars to be able to click on specific buttons and launch specific functionality and associate those button commands with individual action calls or multiple action calls within the application. We talked about how the navigation rules and how window navigation rules will really help control how the information is presented inside the application. Do you want somebody to click on something and have it open up in a new window? Do you want it to open up inline on top of what you were working with before? Should a new session be created? And if so, if a new session should be created, do we have some additional tabs and items that should be brought into that session, and how should those items be displayed within the application? Where should the results of that navigation element be directed to inside the application? We talked about using the debugger to actually see what's going on in your deployment, and if something isn't working right, how to actually go into the debugger and work through those items. We talked about how data parameters and replacement parameters can work together to now pass through contextual information from the context of Unified Service Desk into other areas or elements of the application. And then finally, we just talked about bringing everything together, how those different elements like the hosted controls, the action calls, events, navigation rules, parameters, how they all work together to provide kind of that solution, but how in the grand scheme of things, those are really the foundational components that are going to allow you to build solutions moving forward, and how you need to look at things like agent scripting to be able to provide kind of that guided tour for your agents moving forward. How you want to use session management capabilities like session lines and session overview lines to be able to name sessions and define how things are being presented in the application. We talked about being able to engage developers to create custom themes and custom panel layouts to further customize how the application is presented inside a unified service desk. We talked about the ability to be able to use CTI integration and integrate with your phone system. These are all elements that if you're looking to expand on kind of the foundational skills that we achieve today, how you can use that information moving forward to build functional solutions in the future. So again, that's going to do it for this course. Again, I want to thank you very much for attending and all the time that you've devoted to it. I hope it was helpful, and I wish you guys all the best of luck as you're moving forward. So thank you very much, everybody. Take care and have a good one.